You wake up in the middle of the night. It is a completely ordinary, painfully familiar Tuesday night awakening. Maybe you need a glass of water, maybe you heard a floorboard creak, or maybe your brain just decided it was the perfect time to remind you of that awkward thing you said 5 years ago. You open your eyes. You see the faint glow of the street lamp coming through the blinds. You feel the heavy, soft weight of the blanket. You hear the hum of the refrigerator. You take a breath, you roll over, and you go back to sleep. It is the most mundane experience in the world, and yet it is a luxury so profound, so astronomically rare, that for 99% of human history it was physically impossible. We are not going to talk about biology today. We are not talking about how our jaws shrank or how we learned to walk upright. We are talking about something much more intimate. We are talking about where a human being actually put their head down when there were no walls, no locks, no glass in the windows, and no windows at all. Where do you go when the sun sets, the temperature drops below freezing, and you are surrounded by creatures that can see in the dark while you are effectively blind? You have heard the answer a million times. You learned it in kindergarten. They lived in caves. They were cavemen. Case closed, right? But here is a question nobody actually asks. What if there is no cave? What if the closest cave is 400 miles away? What if the only cave in your valley is currently occupied by a family of short-faced bears who weigh over 2,000 pounds and are not particularly interested in negotiating a lease? What if I told you that the entire concept of the caveman is mostly a geographical illusion, and that for the vast majority of our history, home was a terrifying, fragile, and utterly exposed concept? If we are wrong about the caves, then where were we? Where did we hide? And what happens to the human mind when the only thing standing between you and the endless, hostile wild is a small circle of light from a dying fire? This is the rabbit hole we are going down today. Buckle up, because the story of how we found a place to sleep is about to get weird, bloody, and surprisingly beautiful. Let's start at the very beginning. What does it even mean to not have a roof? Let's start with the most obvious thing, the myth of the ubiquitous cave. When we picture ancient humans, we almost always picture them sitting around a fire inside a rocky cavern. It is such a powerful image that caveman became the default word for our ancestors. But here is the thing. Geology does not care about our convenience. As the paleoanthropologist Dr. John Shea from Stony Brook University often points out, caves are actually incredibly rare in the grand scheme of planetary geography. They require very specific limestone formations, millions of years of water erosion, and tectonic luck. The vast, overwhelming majority of the Earth's surface, the savannas of Africa, the immense steppes of Asia, the dense forests of Europe, has absolutely no caves whatsoever. So, think about the math for a second. If there are millions of early humans and their ancestors spreading across the continents over hundreds of thousands of years, and only a tiny fraction of a percent of that landmass has caves, where is everybody else? The honest answer is, they were outside. They were completely, terrifyingly outside. Picture this. You are Homo erectus. It is 1.5 million years ago. You are somewhere in the vastness of the African savanna. The sun is going down. You have no fur. You have no fangs. You have no night vision. And you know, with absolute certainty, that the big cats are starting to wake up. Leopards, saber-toothed predators, hyenas. Where do you go? For a very long time, our earliest ancestors did exactly what chimpanzees do today. They looked up. They climbed trees. Every single night, they would climb high into the branches, bend and weave the foliage together, and build a temporary sleeping nest. Just a fragile platform of leaves and twigs swaying in the wind, suspended above the nightmare of the ground. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep like that. You can't toss and turn too much, or you plummet 30 feet. You can't fall into the deep, paralyzing stage of REM sleep for too long, because your muscles need to maintain enough tension to grip the branches. You sleep with one eye open, literally and metaphorically. The rustle of a leaf below you spikes your heart rate. The snap of a twig is an alarm bell. And right about now, you are probably thinking, well, that sounds exhausting. Yes, exactly that. It was an existence of permanent, low-grade sleep deprivation. But then, something shifted. Our bodies changed. We got heavier. Our feet lost the grasping toes that made climbing easy. We became obligate bipeds, creatures built for walking and running on the flat earth. We became too heavy and too uncoordinated to sleep in the canopy. We had to come down. We had to sleep on the ground. And honestly, this one breaks my brain. Imagine the sheer audacity, the unbelievable courage of the first hominins who decided, or were forced, to lie down on the open dirt, close their eyes, and just hope for the best. To survive this, they had to invent something new. They couldn't just find a home, they had to build a boundary. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Because long before we had concrete or steel or drywall, we were already trying to draw a line between ourselves and the universe. Let me throw you a timeline that might mess with your head. When we think of the first houses, we usually think of the agricultural revolution. 10,000 years ago. Mud bricks, early farming villages, things like that. Okay, that is settled. Now forget everything I just said. Let's go to a place called Terra Amata in modern-day France. Back in the 1960s, the archaeologist Henry de Lumley and his team were excavating a site there, and they found something that should not have made sense. They found a series of oval patterns on the ground. Post holes, rings of large stones, and right in the center, a patch of burned earth. The dating on this site? Around 400,000 years ago. 400,000 years, long before Homo sapiens even existed. This was the work of Homo heidelbergensis, or perhaps early Neanderthals. They didn't just sleep in the dirt. They gathered thick branches, likely from local trees, and drove them into the sand. They brought heavy rocks from the nearby beach and placed them in a ring around the base of the branches to brace them against the wind. They leaned the branches together at the top, tying them perhaps with animal sinew or tough plant fibers. They built a dome, a hut. Inside that hut, they brought fire. Sit with that for a second. 500,000 years before the pyramids, before writing, before almost everything we consider human history, someone stood on a beach in France, felt the cold wind blowing off the Mediterranean, and decided to build a wall. It wasn't a permanent house. They probably only used it for a few weeks in the spring while hunting in the area, and then they left it to collapse. But the concept was there, the idea of architecture, the idea of modifying the planet to create a pocket of safety. But if you think a hut made of branches is impressive, wait, it is about to get much, much stranger. Fast forward to about 15,000 years ago. The world is in the grip of the last ice age. You are in what is now Ukraine, near a place called Mezhyrich. Look at the landscape. It is a frozen, howling wasteland. The wind cuts through you like broken glass. There are almost no trees, just endless frozen tundra. You need shelter. You need walls. But there is no wood, no mud that isn't frozen solid, and no caves. So what do you use? You look around, and you use the only building material available: monsters. At the Mezhyrich site, archaeologists uncovered a series of huts that look like something out of a dark fantasy novel. They were built entirely out of the bones of woolly mammoths. And I don't mean a few bones scattered around. I mean a calculated, structurally engineered dome made of hundreds of massive bones. The foundation was a ring of giant mammoth skulls, interlocking with their jaws. The walls were made of leg bones and shoulder blades, stacked like macabre bricks. The roof frame was constructed of massive, curving tusks, locked together at the top, likely covered in thick animal hides to keep out the wind. A single mammoth skull can weigh over 200 pounds. These early humans, our direct ancestors, were dragging tons of skeletal remains across the permafrost, solving complex geometric problems of weight distribution and load-bearing angles to build a house out of an elephant. I am not making this up. People genuinely did this, and the evidence for it genuinely melts your brain. Imagine stepping inside one of these bone houses. The smell of the old marrow, the cured hides, the smoke from the central hearth. Outside, the temperature is 30 degrees below zero. The wind is screaming. But inside, beneath a ceiling of interlocked tusks, it is warm. Families sat in there. They carved tools. They made music on bone flutes. They talked. They created life inside the ribcage of death. Honestly, respect. I complain when I have to assemble a coffee table from IKEA, and these people were doing structural engineering with skulls in a blizzard. But let's be honest, building a house out of bones or branches takes a massive amount of calories and effort. If you could find one, nothing beat a pre-made fortress. Nothing beat stone. So let's talk about the caves. Because even though they were rare, when humans did find them, it changed everything. But not in the way you think. Let me ask you this. If you found a massive, deep cave system, where would you sleep? You would probably think as deep inside as possible, right? Far away from the entrance, deep in the dark, where nothing can reach you. Wrong. Archaeologists have mapped human occupation in caves all over the world. From Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, which holds some of the earliest evidence of controlled fire, to the caves of the Levant and Europe. And they found a very specific pattern. Ancient humans almost never lived deep inside the caves. They lived right at the mouth. They lived on the porch. Why? Because a deep cave is actually a terrible place to live. It is pitch black, meaning you need constant fire just to see your own hands. It is damp, meaning your skin would rot and your tools would degrade. But most importantly, it has no ventilation. If you build a large fire deep in a cave, the smoke has nowhere to go. You will suffocate your entire family in a matter of hours. So they lived at the entrance, usually under what geologists call a rock shelter, a deep overhang of stone. And the physics of this space is brilliant. During the day, the rock absorbs the heat of the sun. At night, when the temperature plummets, that rock slowly radiates the heat back down onto the people sleeping below. It is nature's version of a thermal blanket. Furthermore, you build your fire near the entrance. The smoke drifts out into the open air, but the heat reflects off the stone ceiling and warms the back wall. It was an architectural masterclass. And you might say, wait, what about the famous cave paintings? Lascaux in France, Altamira in Spain. Those are deep underground. Didn't they live there? This is the beautiful part. Yes, the paintings are deep inside. Sometimes hundreds of yards into the total darkness, requiring people to crawl on their bellies through narrow, terrifying limestone tubes with a flickering fat lamp in their teeth. But there is almost no evidence of everyday life in those deep chambers. No animal bones from dinner, no discarded sleeping skins, no everyday trash. They didn't live there, they only went down there for something else. The entrance of the cave was the living room, the kitchen, the workshop. It was the ordinary world. But the deep, dark heart of the cave? That was a cathedral. That was the underworld. It was a place of magic, of ritual, of terror and awe. You don't eat your Tuesday night dinner in the most sacred part of a cathedral. You go there to touch the divine, and then you go back to the light. And that brings us to the most important thing of all. The thing that actually turned a pile of rocks or a ring of branches into a home. It wasn't the walls, it was the fire. We take fire for granted. It is the thing on the stove, the thing in the lighter. But for ancient humans, fire was a living, breathing entity. The anthropologist Richard Wrangham has written extensively about how controlling fire literally changed our bodies and our brains. But think about what it did to our psychology. Before fire, the night was a physical barrier. When the sun went down, you were helpless. You huddled in the dark and waited for morning. But when we captured fire, we created something magical. We created a bubble of daylight in the middle of the dark. Look at it this way. Picture a small fire burning in the center of a rock shelter. The light casts a glow about 10 feet in every direction. Beyond that 10 feet, there is the absolute blackness of the prehistoric night. You cannot see the trees. You cannot see the predators. You cannot see the horizon. The world simply ceases to exist beyond the reach of the light. That circle of light became the first true wall. Inside the light, it was warm. Inside the light, you could see the faces of your family. Inside the light, you could fix your tools, share food, and tell stories. The light was us. Outside the light was the cold, the predators, the unknown. The outside was them. This is the exact moment in human history when we divided the universe into two distinct zones, inside and outside, safe and dangerous, domesticated and wild. We didn't just invent the home physically, we invented it psychologically. The fire was the anchor that tied the human mind to a specific piece of geography. For the first time, we didn't just survive on the landscape, we claimed a piece of it. We said, this 10-foot circle of warmth belongs to us, and it changes everything. Because once you claim a space, once you have a safe, warm, dry place that keeps the death of winter at bay, you have something to lose. And this is where it stops being a romantic story about human ingenuity, because we need to talk about the price of the roof. The tone of our story has been triumphant so far. We survived the trees, we built huts out of bones, we mastered the thermal physics of caves. But here is the part we don't like to talk about. Here is the thing nobody puts on the cute infographic in the History Museum. Good shelter was not just a comfort. In a harsh climate, during the endless winters of the Pleistocene, a dry cave with a good rock overhang was not a luxury. It was a strict biological matter of life and death. If your tribe has a cave, your children survive the winter. If your tribe is caught in the open during a 3-week blizzard, your children freeze to death in the snow. It is that simple. Now, remember the math from earlier. Caves are incredibly rare. So what happens when two groups of desperate, freezing, heavily armed humans want the same rare piece of life-saving geography? They don't share. Archaeologists have found dark, unsettling evidence of the brutal competition for shelter. Take the Levant, the region around modern-day Israel and the Middle East. For tens of thousands of years, this was the crossroads of the world, and it was inhabited by both Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, and Neanderthals. If you look at the archaeological layers in some of these caves, like Kibara or similar sites in the region, you see a chilling pattern. You dig down and find a layer of Neanderthal tools and hearths. You dig a little deeper, further back in time, and you find Homo sapiens tools. You dig deeper still, and it is Neanderthals again. The occupation of these premium caves flipped back and forth over thousands of years. And while we don't know the exact details of every encounter, we know human nature. We know the brutal zero-sum game of survival. Put yourself in the scene. It is winter. The wind is lethal. Your tribe is exhausted, starving, and carrying infants who are turning blue from the cold. You finally spot the dark mouth of a cave on the hillside. You approach it. You smell wood smoke. You look inside and you see another group of humans. Maybe they look like you, maybe they are Neanderthals, heavy-browed and muscular. They have a fire, they have dry ground. Could you just walk away? Could you look at your freezing child and say, well, it's occupied, let's keep walking into the blizzard? No, you couldn't. You take your spears, you take your heavy stones, and you go into the dark. We don't know exactly what the screams sounded like echoing off the limestone walls. We don't know the exact mechanics of the slaughter, but we know that groups were displaced. We know that the hearths were taken over. The history of the human home is soaked in blood. The earliest premium real estate on this planet was fought over with an absolute, terrifying ruthlessness. Because empathy dies when the temperature drops to -20 and there is only one fire. We killed our neighbors. We wiped out rival groups. We evicted families into the freezing dark so that our own families could sit by the warm rock. That is the flip side of the circle of light. The boundary that kept the wild animals out also kept the other humans out. The invention of the home was simultaneously the invention of the intruder. The moment we had a threshold, we had something to defend with lethal force. Take that in for a moment. The deep, heavy reality of it. The dry floor you stood on was bought with the lives of whoever stood there yesterday. The peace of a warm night was secured by violence. And suddenly, the romantic image of the caveman by the fire feels a lot heavier, doesn't it? So, how do we reconcile this? How do we hold the genius of the mammoth bone architects in one hand and the bloody spears of the cave wars in the other? We have to look at what all of it was actually for. Look around the room you are in right now. Really look at it. Look at the corners where the drywall meets the ceiling. Look at the glass in the window that holds back the wind but lets in the light. Look at the radiator or the vent silently pumping warm air into the space. It seems so ordinary, so utterly devoid of magic, but it is not. Every single element of the room you are sitting in is the culmination of a 2 million-year war. A war fought with branches on the beaches of France, with mammoth tusks in the frozen tundra of Ukraine, and with spears in the dark caves of the Levant. The room you are in is a permanent physical manifestation of that original circle of firelight. And we still carry the psychological scars of that ancient war. We really do. Why do you think we love the feeling of being under a heavy blanket on a cold night? Why do you think the sound of rain hitting the roof is so deeply, universally comforting? It is not just aesthetics. It is a biological echo. It is the deep, ancestral part of your brain whispering, "We are dry. We are safe. The wild cannot reach us here." And on the flip side, why do we feel that sudden, irrational spike of anxiety when a door is left wide open to the dark? Why do children, across all cultures, instinctively fear the monster under the bed or the shadow in the closet? Because for 99% of our history, the monster was real. The dark was lethal. The open door meant death. We didn't learn to fear the dark for no reason. We learned to fear it because the ones who didn't fear it were eaten, or frozen, or killed by strangers. We are still those same ancient apes. We wear different clothes. We look at glowing rectangles instead of dying embers. But the architecture of our mind was built in the rock shelters of the Pleistocene. We still divide the world into inside and outside. We still desperately need a place where we can drop our guard, close our eyes, and fall into the deep, paralyzed sleep that our ancestors in the trees could only dream of. And the beautiful thing is, we did it. Yes, it cost a horrific amount of suffering. Yes, the history of shelter is dark and violent. But look at what we achieved. We fought the elements, we fought the predators, and we fought each other, all to build a world where a human being can finally close their eyes without fear. The honest truth is, we don't know what awaits humanity in the future. We don't know if we will live in domes on Mars or under the oceans. But wherever we go, we will take that instinct with us. We will build a boundary, we will light a fire, and we will call it home. And that brings us right back to tonight. You wake up in the middle of the night. It is a completely ordinary Tuesday. You hear the wind howling outside. You look at the faint light coming through the window, but this time it feels different. You feel the soft, heavy weight of the blanket, and you realize it is a substitute for a mammoth hide. You hear the hum of the refrigerator, and you realize it is the modern echo of the crackling hearth. You look at the locked wooden door, and you know exactly why it is there. It is the same room, the same bed, the same night. But now you know what stands behind those walls. You are the survivor of a 1-million-year war for a good night's sleep, and you won. Next time you lock your front door for the night, just take a second to feel the weight of that action. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing in your cave, your home, that makes you feel the most secure when the world outside goes dark? I read these and I genuinely want to know what your modern hearth looks like. If this journey changed the way you look at your own four walls, hit subscribe, like the video, and join us. We have a lot more of the ordinary world to turn completely upside down. Until next time, sleep well.